Civilization 5. I start playing the game and I pick Japan. Immediately she tells me that I want to move my warrior all around the world, recommending that that's my course of action as well as building a city where I'm at. Thanks for the advice. Good. Okay, so I'm moving my warrior all around the world, and years are passing while we start our first research, and I'm able to pick which research that I want to start off with. Well, there's a hill terrain south of my city, and there's gems there. So, what am I going to pick? I look at these technologies and I go with mining because I want to get those gems. And I'm moving my warrior around. So let's imagine my society. Okay, you get to pick where your citizens work. So that they're automatically working the tile of your city. So this is where they're getting some of their food and water. Now, if I recall, there wasn't a river on either side of us. So I selected mining for that. And like I said, the tiles, and then they're working another tile, and they're like going into this, I don't remember if it was a forest or not, but that's where they're getting more food. And so if there's no river, then they're looking for groundwater. So they're creating a system of wells. And you have to have food. So they're hunting and gathering food. We don't have a granary. We probably have storage pits. Primitive forms of food storage. We don't have pottery, so we don't have water storage. We just scavenge for groundwater. We're kind of like elephants drinking water out of the ground, using it for primitive methods of bathing, but I don't think you want anybody in that water, so you're just pulling it out and throwing it on yourself. We've taken stone and turned it into plates or bowls, and we're putting water in there and splashing it on ourselves. In the meantime, we're concentrating all of our efforts on figuring out how to get these gems out of this hill. Now, these gems are all different colors, the ones that they show. It's not like if there's turquoise or emeralds, or even diamonds or sapphires, rubies. Maybe it's just a whole mix of them, because you see different colors, and it's not very specific, it just says gems. Now imagine that. Wouldn't you like to have a city of gems? I want to collect all the gems in the entire world. And then I want to build a city of gems. I want to have gold and silver so I could build buildings. Now how would that work? What you do is you build all these different pieces and you slide them into each other and combine them while connecting them to something within the earth. So they can move a little bit. That's what you make so the whole thing can move, so it all bends but doesn't break. Now each segment I would have very fancy designs on it. A cylinder shape with like an umbrella for the roof kind of thing, and they all combine to go around. But the umbrella is creased, so it looks very fancy. Then once it's all put together, and everything is combined, the walls, everything, then we embroider them with gems, and there's gems everywhere. It's a city of gems. We collect all the gems that we can get from the entire world. Now this world is kind of bad, because it ends at a certain point, and then there's darkness. So this map just stops. You don't want to go into that darkness. That's kind of like when they thought if you went past a certain place, you fell off the edge of the world. Well, here you can't even get to it. It's like this dark void. But make sure you move your warrior all around, because they decided that early game your main objective is to look for these ancient ruins. And the other thing you want to do is face barbarians. Well, my city is studying for mining, and I'm moving around. Years pass as we're moving around, and it gets worse as you pick a faster game speed, because while your warrior is spending 200 years just to move around to a certain extent, that makes you advance quicker, and even more time is going by. So it's like for 1,000, 2,000 years, these warriors are out there. This group of warriors is out there exploring the map, and they're traveling from one end of the map to the other over the course of over 1,000 years. So what are they going to do? Come back to this city 1,000 years later? Honey, I'm home! Hi, it's us again, we're back. They come back after 1,000 years, they remember where the city is. They've been telling stories and passing the legends of where they came from. And they're not the only ones doing this, because all the other civilizations did the same thing. They sent their warrior out to explore. So their warrior was gone for over 1,000 years, and then comes back with all of this gold that they have captured from ancient ruins and these other citizens, which they found in the ruins, and this advancements in technology that they learned from ruins, and killed a lot of barbarians. So I think what they decided here is that all the way up until you get gunpowder, that barbarians is going to be the warfare. That's who you're going to be fighting. So like if you have Alexander the Great, or any leader from ancient through classical times, like Augustus Caesar, it's kind of a waste to even have them. Because you're not going to be fighting them, you're going to be fighting barbarians. That's the whole thing that they say, well, what do we keep them busy with in early game? How about they face barbarians and they explore ancient ruins? Well, that's a good idea. Now they could do that until they get gunpowder. Because more than likely, the other civilizations are not going to attack you before that point. And maybe they might during the medieval era. So the stupid thing about this is if you have Alexander the Great, he's not going to be attacking you during this time. That's like, you have these hoplites, and they're just for facing barbarians. You have a hoplite that's traveled from Turkey to China, and he's over there and they want to have an embassy. You're all the way in China, how are you going to have an embassy all the way when my civilization is in Constantinople? And you're going to have an embassy over there? How are you going to get there? We don't have airplanes yet. They're just going to travel all the way there on land, because taking a fleet of ships there, you're going back and forth. Your emissary is going to be going back and forth, circumnavigating, going all the way around Africa, because nobody's built a canal between the Sinai Peninsula and Egypt. There's no canal there, so you can't go through there. What are they going to be like, Corinth, and dragging your ships over that? Somebody owns that territory, so they're not going to just allow you to do that. So they're over there in China, and they have an embassy over in Constantinople. And there's really no way to describe how this works, because it's too far for them to be traveling back and forth. And guess what? If I don't want an embassy with them, they're going to keep bugging me. If I'm like, well, this is basically impossible. Are you talking about the course of thousands of years that it takes to get any information between my capital and theirs? So say that I'm talking to their emissary, and we have a question. So 1,000 years later we get the answer. That would be like before World War II, where the Germans sent their emissary to Russia. And Hitler would be dead by the time that guy gets back with the information. So basically, that doesn't make any sense. But that's not the part of this game that makes the least amount of sense. The least amount of sense is this. You have a city that has a defense. It could go up to 2 tiles away that the city bombards an enemy. And I've tried to make sense of this, saying that, well, I guess it means that the citizens not necessarily bombard them, but that whole land area, there's citizens fighting, attacking. Kind of like a militia, you know, for your city. Like, they're using guerrilla tactics to attack, and that's to simulate those guerrilla tactics of the citizens, even though it looks like they're throwing stones. Because this is really stupid. The range. So this is like if you're in Los Angeles, California, and you're throwing rocks to Nevada to hit an enemy. So these guys should be pitchers for the Dodgers. Imagine trying to hit a ball that they throw. It'd break your bat in half every time you try to hit it. Bo Jackson used to break a baseball bat over his knee. That's nothing compared to what these guys could do with a baseball. The baseball would probably explode, considering that they can throw the baseball from California to Texas. How much you want to bet I can't throw football over those mountains, says Napoleon Dynamite's uncle. Well, he would be one of the guys that was defending your city then, throwing these rocks into the enemy from such a long distance away. City bombardment. Why not just have a levy unit that defends a city under emergency so that appears and it's weaker than normal? You should base it on the amount of strategy of the leader, because you have Napoleon. If he was actually devising a defensive strategy where when he was gone he would have had an organization of what they're supposed to do in that case, and you would leave a contingency plan. And that contingency plan would be based on the strategic ability of your leader. Say you had Elizabeth from England. She was very stingy. She didn't want to do anything stupid. She wouldn't take chances unless that they were very highly in her favor. So she would pick a very good defensive position and make the enemy have to face that no matter what. She wouldn't take chances with anything. She would make sure that she has the best possible plan. And this is different than the way that British normally do things, because usually they just jump into things. But not with her. She shows so much restraint. And I think that that's awesome for them, because they need somebody like that. Because they usually just jump into things. And she keeps them from doing that. She goes even further. She shows an unbelievable amount of restraint. I don't think any leader in history had the restraint of Elizabeth. But that doesn't come into this game, because all you're facing is a bunch of clones. All the leaders are clones of the other leaders. Sure, they get a few extra bonuses, but it doesn't really mean anything as far as the leader's personality. And not only are they clones, they're not very smart. The way that they react doesn't have to make any sense whatsoever. So what you basically have here is all the pieces of a history if a 3-year-old assembled them. And then some new who worked for the British. Yeah, like, why is he over there? That's like you get Bernard Montgomery, and he's over there with the Zulus. Now that wouldn't work at all. Why would Bernard Montgomery have anything to do with the Zulus? The thing is that his mind state and his way of thinking, and Shaka and his way of thinking, they do not coincide. So Bernard Montgomery would end up on a pike with a pike shoved up his butt, out there in front of the city, where everybody can look and see what happened to him for Shaka just not liking him. Because Shaka would not like him. Now if he had General Patton, and he was with the Zulu, that would make more sense, because at least him and Shaka would get along. Because he would go along with the Zulu lifestyle. He would even be doing ceremonial dances. But I can't imagine Bernard Montgomery doing that. So why in the world is he even there? You can have Sun Tzu in England, and you can have other great generals throughout history in places where they just don't belong, and there's no way to explain it. Oda Nobunaga in Japan. Belisarius. Now how did Belisarius get over there? Belisarius was a very good general. But what's he doing over there? He was also a very loyal general. So how did he get all the way over there? Who's your father? Asked Oda Nobunaga. Because he looks so different than them. Albert Einstein with the Zulus. You have Picasso, and he's out there in China. Now none of these have different effects. I don't know if Michael Jackson's in this game. But there you have Michael Jackson. And where is he? Well, he's over there in Korea. You have given birth to Michael Jackson. So you have these great entertainers. Lifeless. Because there's no life in this game. In the earlier versions of Civilization, it had more life in it. So that's Steve Jobs. This is back in the ancient era. So you can't really imagine. He's got these tattered rags on. And what's he going to work on? He builds this manufacturing. And it looks highly advanced for the ancient era. I mean, we're building this thing out of metal, even if we don't have metal. It's not anything like a SimCity type of game. You're not seeing what you build, because all the buildings are pretty much the same, unless you build like a Great Wonder or something. Or unless you build like an arena. You can see that, I think, in a few other buildings. But most of the time you can't even see the changes to your city. Let's use this as an example. Alexandria, the way that they initially... Well, the initial plan for that city that this guy had was to have a giant statue of Alexander. And this is where the water comes down through his arm and into the city. So you can imagine something like this, how unbelievable it would look. Imagine a giant statue of Alexander with his hand out, kind of like the Sphinx. And that's probably where they got the idea of this thing from, because this was when they were already in Egypt. Now let's have the water coming down his hand into feeding the city. This giant statue. And you have this magnificent city underneath it. So let's say you built that. Well, it would look like every other city in this game. They would all look the same. So even if you did that, and you had this idea of fancy buildings, the architecture is just going to look the same as anybody else from your theme. If you're Korea, you have the same theme, I believe, as Japan. So there's no difference in your building. They're just pagoda-style buildings. And some of them just look terrible. Like, you look at their buildings and they look like garbage. Let me pick the civilization with the best-looking buildings. Egypt always looks very spectacular in comparison. The problem is that all the cities just look the same no matter which buildings you build there. You don't feel like you're actually designing a city. You're building buildings just to build numbers, so everything just ends up being numbers. So it sucks the life right out of the game. Like in Civilization, the earlier ones, you could imagine you build an airport, and then you can see like an airplane flying from one city to the other. I don't know if they had that, but I know that they made changes when you built something. In this game, if you built an airport, I don't think they have airplane. I never got that far in the game. I always quit because I get bored. You have an airplane flying up from one city to the other, and they just show like airplanes flying. And as you get more citizens and more advanced, you get more airplanes flying over. That would be cool, and you could even attack these when you're at war with them. Like you could choose to blow up an airplane and then have all the results that would occur, all the hatred that would occur, and the backlash for attacking a civilian plane. They have these trade routes, and they think that's like doing the same thing. No, it's not. The stupid thing is if somebody declares war on you, there goes your trade route already. Like, that was the first thing they did, was kill your trade route, even if your trade route's within your own territory. So it seemed like they just went pretty half-assed on this. Kind of like when the British invaded Istanbul, and they just got their butts kicked, and they didn't really have a plan, they just attacked it. They didn't know what they were doing, and that's how this game seems. Like they just kind of got half-assed with things. And they might say, well, we added this, and we were careful to add that. Well, you suck the life right out of the game, because none of the buildings change. Everything it changes the only time it changes is when you enter a new era. And a lot of times it doesn't even make the buildings look better. I believe during some era transitions that the buildings don't even change at all for certain civilizations. So that's kind of stupid. Now that's really stupid. So here's another thing. The leaders are all stupid. They don't want to trade anything even if it works to their advantage. They ask for incredible amounts during trade negotiations. So let's just think of how this would actually work. If you had Hitler as the leader of a civilization, and I guess maybe you can explain that you have the same leader through years and over years, that you just have somebody in the mold of this person leading that civilization, so you get to see what would happen if you had that leader leading the civilization from its birth all the way to the end of it, or as far as the end of the game. So let's say you have Adolf Hitler. What would happen with him? Well, if we start off with a civilization, he would be the guy talking a lot. And he would have all these ideas and things that he believes in and trying to get other people to follow with this. Now, he would be very passionate about these ideas, and then he would get other people to follow them. More than likely, this would be like the hunters who go out and kill, and he would be with them. And that he would have them assemble themselves around him as a bodyguard, a loyal bodyguard. And then they would take control of the city. And they would take control of everything around them. And anybody that got in their path, they would stomp over. Now, if he had a problem with any other civilization, he would justify that through great speeches. And justify the one that he hates most as being abomination to all of mankind. So he would have a lot of slaves, so they would go and conquer them. Because first thing, he would have this bodyguard. And then he would have another bodyguard. And that bodyguard would expand. And these two bodyguards, you would already have a professional army, and that would just be your bodyguards. And then he would have a main army as well, which he would have control over. So he would have already this large force. That would be the first thing they would be working on. Now he would take them and they would go and gather slaves. These slaves would help build his dream city. So he would be very enthusiastic about building and advancing and coming up with all these ideas and having them turn to reality. Giant arenas, giant buildings that get bigger and bigger. And they would be built on slave labor. So the people that were there, the people at the heart of his civilization, because he would have this whole bloodline thing with it being purified Everybody outside of that would just be slaves, and on the inside of that, they would be living in luxury with all these beautiful palaces and gardens. So only they would actually be able to have a good life, and the people outside of that, their lives would be torture. And he wouldn't care. And then the people who live within this place, this beautiful place separated from it, they would have a different life. So after a while, he would just try to cleanse all of those slaves after they've built enough stuff and he's taken over enough stuff. Now, in this game, what would he really be like in this video game? So that's what Hitler would do. But in this video game, what he would be doing would be having one city, because he built a whole bunch of units. And that city, by the time you get to the medieval era, has a granary and a barracks. Because all he did the rest of the time was build units that got killed, attacking somebody else. So now he has no units left. He has one city. He had two cities, but one got taken over. So what does he do now? All Hitler does is he talks shit to the player. He denounces them every certain amount of time. And he just sits there waiting to get his ass kicked. Now none of the computer go to finish him off, and even though he's so far away from you, he's still talking bad and denouncing you. And even though, yeah, you could go over there if you wanted to move your units all the way across the world to finish him off. He's making such a big deal about this. He's always denouncing you, and he's saying, oh great, now I've got to deal with you and them. Even though that he has no army. And he has very little production. And he's just basically wasted the entire game doing nothing. Now let's go over to Stalin. What would happen with him? If you started things off with him, he would be talking behind the ears of these other Proto-Slavs, who are pretty mellow to Proto-Slavs, but they'll go along with any good idea that they hear about. So he might have an idea that sounds good to them. Not all of them, just some of them. Well, they're advancing their fishing methods and basically living leisurely lives. Because that's what the Proto-Slavs were like. Just kind of hang back and relax. They're really mellow, but if you get in a fight with one of these guys, they are very tough. I mean, they don't care about getting hurt. They don't mind physical pain. So they're good at also building stuff because they want to find ways to make it easier so that they can relax the rest of the time. So then you got someone like him. Now, he gets some other people to go along with his ideas. They're violent. They just sneak up on everybody. So they sneak up and they take over the city. And they leave the women so that they can have sex with them so that they can reproduce. But then he doesn't trust his own children, so he has them liquidated. He doesn't trust anybody. So even his heirs, he's having them liquidated. So then he has to get a civilization from somewhere else because he's liquidated a lot of the people. So they don't really have any legacy. So he knows that he has to invade somewhere. So he finds somewhere weak enough and they go in there and take it over. He forces them to be completely subservient and uses fear to keep them in line. Well, he has them undergo these vast building projects to make up for all the lost time. So he increases his civilization that way. Now, he finally would have a heir from his bloodline, probably like his last child, because he knows he has to have an heir. He liquidated the rest of them because he couldn't trust them. Even his daughter, who didn't like his methods, he had her liquidated, and all of his close friends. So that civilization continues with another one of him. It's basically mafia-style tactics. If you want to talk about a country that was a mafia, that would be Stalin's Russia. That was a giant mafia. You say the wrong thing, you get whacked. You even look like you're doing the wrong thing, you get whacked. So he had the most severe version of a mafia. You look at him wrong, you get whacked. So what do? You have to be very careful if you're even around him. If he tells a joke, you laugh at it just right. If he thinks that you're not laughing at it the right way, you get whacked. So you basically have your mafia organization. In this game, you would have one city left. He's sitting there building all the wrong things. They have no units. When you look at the demographics, they're like the last in army. They're pretty much not doing anything except denouncing the player. Even though the player has a much larger army, they're constantly denouncing you. Or maybe they just get along with you. And the weird thing is that both him and Hitler get along with it. They have tremendous relations with the person who put them in these situations. They have an open borders contract with them. They have all these friendly relations, and they have nothing bad to say about them. They don't hold any grudge against them. But because you're friends with Carthage, they both want to denounce you. So this game, they're all mentally inept. And these are supposed to be some of the greatest leaders in world history. In this game, they're not. So it's just like what you did is you just took like the most basic parts of history, like the surface parts of it, the most surface, the most basic. It's like history for dummies. You put that into this game as the theme. And you have all these leaders who are just clones. That's who you're competing against, is the worst leaders in world history. You're dealing with people who don't know what they're doing. Then you get to see the military genius of Alexander when he has all these units around the city, and they finally have it surrounded, and then he moves some of his units away when they have the city surrounded. And then those ones that are there get picked off, so he brings his other ones in so they can get picked off. And then there's a few units that are just sitting there. And then the good idea always is to get into the ocean where you're more vulnerable, so you can get bombarded and sunk. So then Alexander ends up just making peace with them, and even give them one of his cities. So it's not like that's Alexander. You already know that's not him because you wouldn't do those things. You're competing against these faceless leaders. All the life is sucked right out of it. It takes years for a war. Like you might spend 1,000 years just traveling, just getting all of your units in the right position to attack a city. So the interface is where all the life is. And then you look at the game, and maybe the interface and these clouds, that's where all the life is. And in the resources, and seeing a whale do a jump over the water. They took animals out of this game, so I thought that was kind of interesting to see that in the other game that I played, Civilization 4. And that game also had a lot of the same problems. It was better than this one because this game, it just seems like to get more lifeless as you go on. The games do. And the AI gets more ridiculously stupid. I think my problem is I know so much about world history, and that's the theme they're going with. If you know a lot about baseball and you're really into baseball, and then you're playing this game that has nothing to do with baseball, that only has like the bare minimum of it, Beethoven. There he is. Beethoven is over there in Vietnam, part of that civilization. Beethoven is riding on a giant elephant. Then they build their wonders in places where they don't go. I think that they should have just stuck with the theme, like I was talking about with Alexander. Why don't they just go with the what-ifs that they could have done? That would have made this game a lot better. Because world history to me is perfect as it is. So if you're going to change it, at least do something exciting that they would have done. Like the city in Alexandria. I can imagine with this game it would be built by Mongolia. And that wouldn't make any sense at all, especially considering that it's the statue of Alexander. Kind of like when you had Egypt and they have the city Alexandria. That doesn't make any sense. Because only Alexander would name the city that. Or somebody else named Alexander. So why don't you make it so that Greece can go with these what-ifs? That they could build that city, but no other civilization can. So the thing that they were, well, nobody could really build a city like that, you say, but you wouldn't believe they could build the pyramids either. Unless you could see them with your eyes. Then Hitler could realize his dreams and build the city that he wanted to build, if you get to that point. Don't just make it some basic stupid thing. Why don't you use common sense for why they could build this stuff? And make it go along with the leader that you pick so everyone could be different. So that way when you start a new game, you get a whole new experience. Not just a couple new stats here and there. What if Japan could have an army of ninjas? Wouldn't that be cool? And at least it goes along with the civilization. So you could change it that way. What if they never decided to follow the American model? So they kept their feudal system and samurais. They still had samurais, and they may have changed that. And you could have like a modern version of a samurai. You could have like a modern samurai and a modern ninja army, like a cybernetic ninja. Why don't they have stuff like that? Then this game would be cool. But instead, you get this hollow thing. So even if I went through the whole game and finished it, I would get no satisfaction. I feel like I didn't accomplish anything. It's just a hollow game. You watch the stupidity of the AI as it attacks itself. It does all these stupid things. Like they have a city and they're about to capture it. Like the Persians are about to recapture Susa from the Assyrians. They have the city completely surrounded. They just move their units away and let themselves get picked off. And what sense does that make? Go to Nabunga, there in Japan, and this giant wave sweeps over and kills people. And there's nothing to simulate that in this game. So what is there to simulate? Just numbers? That's all this game is numbers. It might as well just be a card game. There's just a bare minimum of world history in this game, combined without any pattern. They're just thrown in there. It's like if you just took world history and picked a whole bunch of different parts that you wanted, but only like the bare basics of it. And then you just put it into a hat, and people just drew stuff out of it, and that's what you get. And then you play this game, and that's the world that you're supposed to immerse yourself in this world. You don't care what happens to anybody in it. In this game, you're getting thrown into a world that makes no sense at all. There's no life in this game. You don't really see a world developing. You don't see things getting built. You don't see things developing. Everything in this game is as lifeless as possible. You don't have an airport with the planes flying over. You don't see traffic along these roads simulating the growth of your empire. It's just your trade caravan. And then there's exploits in this game that they just left there. Like you could have an archer that could shoot 3 tiles if you get that promotion. And that's how a lot of people beat this game on the highest difficulty. If they get a whole bunch of archers and they make that 3 tile promotion. Which is just stupid anyway, because there's no way your archer should be able to shoot that far. What kind of archers are these? I mean, Superman's got nothing on these guys with their magic arrows. You could pick off the president of the United States from the White House if you got an archer all the way over there in St. Louis, Missouri. You could actually assassinate the president if you wanted to, because he could shoot that far. That's the kind of game world that you're involved in. Now, the only type of thing in this game that has any life to it is the nuclear explosions. But actually, those aren't as devastating. You don't really feel for the citizens of those cities. I don't. They have pretty cool effects. And you're a World Congress where you make these decisions, and none of them have any life in them as well. So this game is just a lifeless void, and you're not really facing Alexander, you're not really facing Napoleon, Catherine, you're not really facing any of these great leaders. No Genghis Khan, Attila the Hun, they don't have the same effect. You watch Attila the Hun, you're supposed to be in fear of him with this one city, and he's just hanging onto a thread and making friends with people who have abused him in the past. Meanwhile, he's denouncing you. And then you have your warrior moving around from Egypt all the way into China and back. And he's supposed to come back to your civilization. At that point, 2,000 years later, he returns to your civilization, your warrior unit, with some information for you. It just takes the surface of some of the stuff from world history and throws it over this mess. And if you have too many cities too close together, so you can't have that, because they can bombard somebody. So you can't have cities that are next to each other like you would have in real life. Like you can't have San Diego and Los Angeles because they'd be too close together. You would have to be further enough away, like where you have Phoenix, Arizona, and Los Angeles. I think that's doable. And then both of them can take turns bombarding whoever's over there standing in Las Vegas. So you're all the way there in Los Angeles. And you're throwing a rock over at the guy in Nevada. You hit him in the face. Probably laughing your ass off. He doesn't even know what's going on. How could they even see me? This was in the ancient era. There's no satellite or nothing. How's he even seeing me and he hit me right in the face? That giant dirt rock. Now I've got permanent damage on my face. And I didn't even do anything.